And today I want to talk about dealing with generational trauma. Dealing with generational trauma. We talk about destroying generational curses all the time. We talk about breaking the things that are coming from our lineage. The things that we see, the habits and the patterns that we see come from one person to the other person. And we talk about commanding generational blessings so that the things that past generations can come back into the family lineage and continue after us. But the truth is, when I started to study the word and to do some research, I realized that trauma gives birth to curses. I realized that trauma gives birth to curses. It is our response to some situations that we have been through that introduces curses in our lives. And we have a saying that we say, hurt people hurt people. And broken people tend to gather with broken people. And if brokenness is all that you know, you have no choice but to give brokenness. And so you have a pattern forming where you experience brokenness and you introduce brokenness to your children. And your children are trained to be broken. And they have children and produce broken children. And the cycle continues until what we have is a community of broken people. And that community will socialize with other people. And so you have a disease of brokenness and a society that is broken. Some of the major things that we see happen in society now started from some trauma. Some of the things that we can't even figure a solution to get rid of started from trauma. And so I thought it was so important while I was praying and I heard generational trauma. And I said this is so important because there is a purpose. We know this. There is a purpose that God has for every individual. And there is a destiny that we must fulfill. But the truth is, some of the times because of generational curses that we have to be living with in our lifetime, that the reality is some of them we can't explain because they didn't start with us. They began before us. Somebody needs to know that there is remedy for the trauma that you are experiencing. Somebody needs to know that the wounds that you have had to be stitching up, that you didn't even cause upon yourself. There is deliverance for that trauma today. There is breakthrough for that wound today. That the curse that is causing you and causing you to struggle, there is a release. That's why he was wounded for our transgression. He was bruised for our iniquity. The chastisement of our peace was upon him, and by his stripes we are healed. There is a remedy for the trauma. So we're going to deal with the generational trauma today. You know, I even said to God, but is this thing biblical? Because I'm not going to come up here and talk about something that I have no biblical grounding for. Because it's the word we have to live by. And I was digging. I couldn't believe the story that I ended up coming full circle to. But I was digging because I wanted to know if this was biblical. And the reality is there are so many families in the Bible that was dysfunctional. There are so many families in the Bible who suffered from generational curse. There are so many families in the Bible that because of what the father did, a particular habit continues to perpetuate through generation and generation. And perhaps when he was manifesting through the younger generation, they could not understand why is it I can't break this habit. You have a habit and you wonder why I can't break this habit. I pray about it, I fast about it, but this thing just won't leave me. It feels as though I can't get rid of it. I got to counseling for it. I talk about it. I ask for help with it. I confess about it. But I can't seem to get rid of it. The reality is, the root of the problem didn't start with you. The Trauma, they say by definition, is an emotional response that is produced after somebody experiences a terrible experience or a terrible event. So, for example, someone who is raped, or someone who may have been robbed, or someone who might have been abused, or something like an accident. Anything that may cause you primarily fear, we consider it to be a traumatic event. And so it produces an emotional response. But I think apart from an emotional response, that trauma produces a spiritual response. Because when an event takes place in your life, your emotions are not just your emotions. Yes, it is triggered by whatever the situation is. And it may be your initial reaction to that situation. But you see, the way we respond, I believe it also opens a door. That the force that is connected to that emotion now walks through. And so, you met in the accident, it might cause you to have some flashback, or you have some anxiety. Maybe you don't want to drive no more. Maybe you decide to lock up in your house and depression starts to take you. And you not realizing that apart from that emotional response, a door has been opened in the spirit realm. That there is a demon that wants to magnify the situation before your eyes. There's a demon that now wants to replay that thing every single day now. So you feel like you can't move past the situation. And because it likes company, it's going to try and keep you in the position that you can't recover and you can't get healing. So you find that depression starts to bear loneliness. And loneliness starts to give birth to anxiety. And anxiety starts to give birth to other spirits. And before you know it, you have a legion that is operating through that situation. And you're wondering why as years go by, I'm not getting better, I'm getting worse. It's because when the emotional response was created, so was a spiritual response. And door became open, and the force that was connected to that thing is now introduced into your life. And the thing about it is that, as I said, because it's all you know, especially when you talk about abuse, when it's all you know, like you grew up in an abusive home, whether you're the one who experienced the abuse or you see the abuse, and that's all you know. Sometimes you grow up to believe that it's okay to be abused, because that's the norm. Is it a word norm? Normal? Norm can be so subjective. Because what is normal to you may not be normal to me. And some of us that experience some severe trauma, what becomes normal to you, another person cannot fathom. Why you would think living in an abusive relationship is normal? Why would you think living in a home that is filled with molestation is normal? Why would you think living in a home where your drug users are normal? But because I have never lived what you live, I cannot understand the conditioning of your mind. But the reality is that there is a remedy for the dysfunction. And even if in your mind you feel as though it is normal, I want somebody to come face to face with the trauma today. Because enough is enough. We live in a culture where we believe we must sweep things under the rug, and we then let's look at the lineage of Abraham. In Genesis 12. We won't be able to look at everything, so I'm trying to jump through the story to reach to Jacob. So in Genesis 12, that's about verse 10. This generation got plagued with deception. It's not funny. Genesis 12 and verse 10. Alright. So we're not going to read the entire chapter. We're going to jump to Genesis 20. But just to make sure we're all on the same page, there was famine. Abraham went down to Egypt. Abraham is married to Sarah. For fear of being killed by somebody who would want to take Sarah as wife, Abraham decided that they would deceive the king. So he said to Sarah, tell them that I am your brother. Tell them you are my sister. Rather than tell them that you are my wife. Because you're beautiful. And if one of them wants you and I am the hindrance, them are going to kill me to get you. That was lie and deception. Let's continue. Genesis 20. In Genesis 12, he told the king that she was his sister. We didn't read that part, but what happened was when they took Sarah into the palace, plague take the king. God made plague taking, destruction took the king. And immediately he sent for Abraham. Perhaps because the word didn't tell us if it was clear. It said God visited him with plague. But I don't know if God said to him plain and straight at this point, that is the man wife where you take. But let us say peradventure all was well in the palace until I took this woman as my wife. So something not right about the way she come into the palace. In Genesis 20, it tells us that when he lied, God visited the king and told him to spare in life. The woman, what is this thing that you have done? For the woman that you have taken is another man's wife. So you know what you better do? Take them and make them leave. And let no harm come to them. And the king said to him, how could you do this thing? I wanted to Abraham, you do it already. And you get to him. Why you come do it again? I saw me talk when you read it. Why you come do it again? You get to read it and you come back and do it again. But he did the very same thing again. Now what happened before Abraham, we don't know. But at that event, for fear of his life, his response was to lie and to deceive. You are going to see how this very same thing continued to 2 generations after Abraham. Now, whether or not the events were connected does not matter. What I want to demonstrate is that when something gets introduced into a generation, if it is not broken, it will continue to manifest itself, even if you didn't teach it directly to your children, because children imitate your behavior, and whatever you say is what they believe. And my mother says, who a word never take over my mother? And my father says, who a word never take over my father? Children believe what you say, and they learn even more by what you do. So whether or not Abraham taught this deception to Isaac, the exact same thing come back and manifest again. Let us look at Genesis 26. 6 chapters down. Genesis 26 verse 6 to 9. He passed off his wife as his sister because of fear of his life. And when he least expect it, me sure Abimelech never go out there to go look, see nothing. Probably just a look out. And there was it to him face, him and his wife made the most of one another. In a way that was very obvious that this was not a brother-sister relationship. So the deception that started with Abraham has now found itself into the second generation. And the thing is, it got worse in the third generation. Because Isaac was the one who produced Jacob and Esau. And Jacob's life was filled with deception. In chapter 25, we're not going to necessarily go there. But in chapter 25 is when Jacob was birthed. And we know the story that Esau and Jacob were twins. And when Esau came out, and Jacob was about to come out, they saw Jacob's hand holding on to Esau's heel. And that event they used to name him. You see, name and identification is very powerful. Because even the name that they gave to him perpetuated the emotion, the response that Abraham made from Egypt. Jacob was his name because it meant supplanter, which really means trickster. And a trickster is one that deceives people, that tricks people. I don't know if they thought about it and the repercussions it was going to have in his lifetime to come. But there was a condemnation to name him that. And I want to tell somebody, be careful of what you call your children. Not just the Christian name that you give them, because that's what we call it, your first name, a Christian name. But the kind of conversation you have over your children. Some of us, because of the trauma that we deal with, we look at that child and you see the person that you had the child with, and so you now come to nothing because you have all of this bitterness over the person, and because maybe it was a real situation, so you never want the child, and so you come and you manifest and you confess and you say all these things over the child and not recognizing that your words have power. The word of God says life and death is in the power of the tongue. So in everything I am saying, all I am feeling is what I pass on to that child. My communication has now conditioned that child to operate a certain way. No wonder why when you see some young people with low self-esteem and you listen to their story, that low self-esteem and travel from mother and past mother go grandmother and past grandmother go great-grandmother, because the root of it they don't know and they can't understand. But for some reason their life has been traumatized for what they can't even explain. Generational trauma. Watch the communication. Two things I sum up that causes or perpetuates generational trauma. I'm no psychologist. I can't go into it in details. But it's a toxic experience, toxicity, poisonous things that you say that you don't even realize that you are saying. Things that you preach and you speak over people, not just children. Things you pass on to your siblings. Things you transfer to your friends. Things that you're going to your workplace and say to your co-workers. Things that you say about your church sister and brother in church. Be careful, because you transfer what you say. Your conversation has power, and if you're not careful, you cause destruction to come to people. The toxic conversation, the communication. In that moment when Jacob was born and they named him Jacob, it started a whole series of deception in his life. You see the reality, and you see, because they say misery loves company. So you see, when you yourself live one certain reality, missionary, I cannot afford for you to have any sort of joy if all I know is misery. So I am going to do the best I can to have you living in misery as much as I can. I look for misery wherever it is, because I need to be comfortable Misery want company. It was about to give birth to a series of things in Jacob's life. Whether he learned them directly or indirectly. But the same art of deception that his grandfather and his father had cultivated is what he was now perpetuating. And not only did he perpetuate it, but he married into it. Because his father-in-law, which was his uncle, when it was time for him to get the wife that he worked for, he deceived him and gave him the sister. And tell him to work another 7 years to get what he really worked for. You see, sometimes because we are in a particular traumatic event, I'm going to get attracted to a person in that same traumatic event. And it's fierce to know everything will go downhill because I only know trauma. Pastor only know trauma. We come together producing more trauma. That child only know trauma. They come produce trauma. And you're wondering over generational story. Can't change. The trauma needs a remedy. It needs to come into contact with Jesus because it must change. It needs to get the power of the stripes that were given to him on the cross. It needs a redemption. If the story can't change, if the cycle is not broken, if the conversation not change, then the environment can't different. So whatever you need to condition the environment, you have got to do something different to recondition the environment. You have to do something to make the spirits that have now entered into the situation uncomfortable. Because if you are giving it all the things, there's a thing instance they talk about the environment that is needed for certain reactions to take place. So when the right factors are present, then so and so will continue. When the right factors for these spirits are present, then it will continue to plague you. Deception and lie continued throughout Jacob's lifetime. He tricked his father into giving him his brother's blessing. He tricked his brother into giving him his birthright. He married into trauma. And even though God had already prophesied and told him that there would be division in the family because of those two children, it still unfolded itself because one parent favored one child and one parent favored the other child. And so because Rebecca favored her child, she decides that she will make sure that him get the blessing. I want us to understand that because of what has taken place, the trauma gave birth to the curse, and the curse continued to perpetuate. And because the curse continued to perpetuate, then all sorts of baggage that never even present start to get entertained. Because once the door opens, once the portal opens, once the spirit come in, and you are entertained, it moves from the doorway and reach into the living room. And in the living room, it's going to your bedroom. It moves from your bedroom, it's gone into your kitchen. You decide you will get married and reach into your marriage. You're about to have children and reach into the labor room. You have children and they grow up, they reach into the school. The children want to work here, wonder how you can get employed. He's in the workplace. Because the curse has not been broken. But I want to tell somebody that today, every curse, every trauma, every response, anti-God must be broken in the name of Jesus. We refuse to entertain any more spirit, and the healing must start now in the name of Jesus. It must start today. It must start today. Your destiny depends on it. It must start today. It must start today. I can talk about myself. I'm kind of glad that I'm not there because they shouldn't want me talking, but we can talk about my business because it's what I know. I only for generational trauma in my family. And when I was getting married, one we fasted. The fast never from my mind. Because everybody who has been married the last week is just crazy. So the last thing I want to be doing is depriving myself of food. But you see, everything that they want to manifest is like it get magnified now because of the week of fasting. And those things have to be destroyed. I want you to understand me and talk about it. I know it. Every sort of trauma, every sort of force that I can think of has been in my lineage. And one of the reasons why I had to cut it down is because I have a desire to bear my generation to come after me. And let it take its can't past me. And go into my children. The devil is a liar. I am not worshiping God for the struggles that I experience. My children must come experience it. So every seed that was planted, that is waiting for my children to come and establish its roots, I cut it down and I pull it up in the name of Jesus. I cannot afford for my children to struggle for what they never do. And I decided that everything when we did that struggle and we can explain must cut down now. In Jesus' name. In Jesus' name. I want you and I will give it to you exactly how I got it. I asked missionary to give me something this morning. Missionary, give me some of them pillows. I want you to understand how we deal with trauma and why it's dangerous to deal with it like that. So I am this generation. They say I'm a millennial. So I said, so that means there may be at least 2 generations that were before me. There are 2. Let me talk about myself. When my grandmother first experienced trauma, our society have a way where we say, you sit him out and you put it under the rug. When I have no rug, the rug too heavy. So this is what we do. Zip up. Because of the trauma, the tools when my grandmother did have to pass on to my mother, never did it. Because trauma have a way to mess your life up, you know. Even the things that you were capable of doing, when you experience trauma, it's like it makes all of them something, but it's like it numb you. So she only transfers the trauma. So now, my mother now just deal with the struggles but she had have in her life. She had deal with fear struggles. Plus the trauma will come down. But this is what we're doing. Then I come. The first of the 2. She don't know how to deal with it. Because who was before her don't know how to deal with it. We don't do counseling. There is something we don't know where it comes from, but black people that do counseling. And this thing always said, tell it to Jesus. Nothing wrong with telling it to Jesus. But counseling is important. It is important to work through the things you experience. And so nobody will deal with it before me. So me come and start encounter some things. My mother can't speak into me the way I need a mother to because she was never spoken into. The conversation that is over my life is not edifying to me because the one that was had over her was not edifying to she. I don't know what self-love is because my mother don't know what self-love is. So I'm walking around with transferred trauma and then because me of that trauma, me only attract more trauma. And we are continuing so. And so generation upon generation, we're not no more. Upon generation, upon generation. What do you think eventually happens? There's gonna be a generation where all of this is too much to handle. Where all of this, thank you. Because we have not dealt with it in the proper way. If you had more pillars, you would realize that no time the problem rises. Because when I am the one standing in front of the issues, the reason why I don't have the explanation because too much things under the rug that I don't have to explanation for. It didn't start with me, but it will end with me. The position that I am taking about this trauma is not to put it under the rug, but it is to let it surface, because I must recognize every spirit, every force, every element, every habit, every pattern that has come to the forefront. I break it in the name of Jesus. It comes to surface. But already said when I identify it, you cannot deal with it. So we have to first let it come to the surface. And whether it's going to make you uncomfortable or not, everything that is under the rug, I'm challenging you, bring it to the surface. I got to live this, that's why I'm going dangerous. Because all things when you know, all the people them there, you still a struggle for it. Because it was never dealt with. You see, when we come in, I bet you say one perfect generational curse is different. Because all the things that you have had to struggle for, they were not your fault. And you're carrying the burden of forefathers and generations before you that were not broken, because the contract that was made, it not expire, but I bring everything in the mighty name of Jesus. I out every terminate, every contract and agreement that was made over your family, over your bloodline, and your generations to come. I don't care if it started with you, but our position will be different, because our communication will be different. Let me show you something. If this was fear, I thought about it. I said, God, it's good when we tell people them say yes, come to you. But what do you say when you're dealing with trauma? We say you take it from under the cover, don't it? And you recognize it. What I said afterwards is the communication that you have that perpetuates trauma. So it means that your communication has to change. So when I recognize this, let's say this is fear. God has not given me a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. Let's say this one is suicide. I shall not die, but I shall live to declare the words of the Lord. Let's say a sickness the one ya, by his stripes I am healed. Let's say a depression the one ya, cast your cares upon me, because I care for you. My burden, Almighty God, he said my yoke is easy and my burden is light. It doesn't matter what has been confronting you. There is a word that can remedy that situation. When sometimes the confusion, Almighty God, sometimes you feel like you're torment, but thou shalt not be afraid of the terror by night. Nobody arrow that flying back there. Nobody pestilence that walketh in darkness. Nobody destruction that wasted at noonday. You have not given me a spirit of fear, but of love, power, and of a sound mind. It's a conversation. It's a conversation. Sometimes I low self-esteem. But what are you going to say? I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are thy works, and my soul knoweth very well. There is a work. You are made in the image and the likeness of God. Baby, when you were being made, the Trinity had conversation about you. There is a conversation that reconditions trauma. There is a conversation that makes spirits uncomfortable. And if you reach to a point where it's the lies that you have been told, and it's the identifications that have been made about you, there is a name that is greater than any other name. That at the name of Jesus, every knee must bow and every tongue must confess family line, they must scatter in the name of Jesus. Because we recognize you. And I want to say this as a side note. You see, in deliverance, doing church and deliverance that take place, do not be a spectator. Be very careful. As spirits that come out of people, they're looking for somewhere to go and lodge. And if you're an open door, hello? Why is this even important? Why is it important? Why is this trauma and we are the same people then? Coming into the house of God, trying to worship and live a righteous life, but the trauma will back you up and pack you up. Can't allow you to be free. Some of us, our biggest problem is we're not free. But I pray freedom for you. I pray freedom for us. Not just for us, I pray freedom for us. And even after this, we're going to have to do the work that is necessary. The last thing is to receive healing. Remember we say you change the communication, change the position. Stop put them on their room. Put them at the altar. Put them at the altar. Who is to cast your cares upon me? Put them at the altar. Put them at the altar. It is time that we stop walk around stitching up wounds that are not even being cured. You're not cleaning it up, but you have to stitch it up. It is time. You have to decide, because this is such a long-standing habit that we said people can't talk about. Nobody needs to know. It's such a long-standing practice. It's going to be hard to undo. I know that. But someone has to decide that the silence is enough. Your breakthrough is not in your silence. Because the truth is, the devil wants you to be silent. Because once you're silent and you're in denial, it never happened to you. He can magnify it, he can manipulate it, he can work on your mind, and it starts to breathe other thoughts of trauma. Enough is enough. Today, people of God, I hope that what we could get is how you deal with the trauma. We recognize the trauma. Change the conversation, because of that start the trauma. So if the conversation starts, you have to have different conversation to end it. And the conversation, your prayer, your day to day, even in your prayer, even in what you say over your children, fill their cup with the right sort of thing. Because whatever you put in it is what they will pour out. And change the position of the trauma. Take it from under the rug and put it at the altar. God bless you.